Number 10, Uncle Ben. I figured we'd kick this list off with a fresh, tragic reminder of how Spider-Man came to be in the first place. I'm really glad the MCU didn't make us sit through this scene again. In Spider-Man's first comic book appearance, Amazing Fantasy issue 15, Peter's life changes a lot in those 35 pages. He gets bitten by a radioactive spider, giving him life-changing, incredible abilities. He makes some cash, taking down some wrestlers. He literally gets scouted by a TV producer after just one gig. He learns how to shoot webs. He makes a sweet outfit, makes a sweet appearance on a sweet TV show. This guy's literally offered movie roles, interviews, tons of money, and Peter at this point is now just cocky as hell. He's like, yeah, call my agent, boys, I'm busy. And then a thief runs by and he doesn't do a single thing about it because he's through being pushed around. Okay, great. Well, you know the drill. That same thief was the guy who ended up taking Uncle Ben's life. You played yourself, Pete. Number 9, Armed and Dangerous. In The Amazing Spider-Man issue 100, we find Peter on the streets, webbing up some bad guys, just a usual Thursday night. Now at this point, he's getting tired of New Yorkers looking at him like he's the criminal. He's kind of done being with Spider-Man, so he wants to hang up the spandex and settle down with Gwen Stacy. Now in order for this to happen, Peter needs to get rid of Spider-Man completely. And so he begins working on a serum that will strip him of his powers. He doesn't even test it out either. He just mixes it up and then gulp right down the hatch. Okay, he's brave. Whatever happens, I did it for you, Gwen. I wonder if that includes growing 4 extra arms. Yeah, those back massages just got way better in the Parker household. It's a funny couple of issues. I mean, some panels with Peter having extra naked arms in the frame, it does look a little bit odd. Only after making a new serum with Morbius's blood did Peter go back to normal. Number 8, One More Day. This 4-parter began back in 2007 in Amazing Spider-Man issue 544, and instead of Peter dealing with thugs or giant lizards, he's now dealing with the devil, Mephisto. Now we thought he was the one pulling the strings in WandaVision, and some still believe that he's pretending to be Doctor Strange in the No Way Home trailer, some being me, perhaps, I'll never tell. And it's because of this comic that makes us think this stuff. This takes place after Civil War, right after Spider-Man reveals his identity to the public, so now villains are going after him. So when a bullet strikes Aunt May instead of Peter, he feels guilty beyond imagination. So this looks like a job for the devil. Mephisto appears in the form of a young girl and lures Spider-Man away to offer him a deal. Mephisto tells Peter that he can save Aunt May, but the payment also has to be pretty high caliber. He doesn't want Peter's soul or anything like that. Instead, he wants his marriage. So they agree as long as Peter's secret identity becomes a secret again. So right before Mephisto alters reality, he tells the couple that the young girl that he appeared as was actually their future daughter, adding insult to injury. Peter wakes up the next day alone with Aunt May alive, score, and the world doesn't know who Spider-Man is. I think this is a win. I think it's a loss. I'm not sure what to call this, but either way, my heart hurts. And before we continue on with this list, if you want to give us a thumbs up, you know the drill. If you're loving this content, or if you want a part 2, hit that thumbs up, comment down below, give us all the love, and then we'll give it all back. You guys are amazing. Now back to this list. Number 7, Doc Swap. The Dying Wish storyline begins in The Amazing Spider-Man issue 698. Peter gets a priority call from the Avengers, and when he meets them at the raft, Cap and the team are waiting. He tells Peter an old enemy of his is not looking too shabby and he probably won't make it. Peter knows off the bat already that it's Doc Ock. He just knows it somehow. Incredible. So he asks everybody for a moment alone, just them two. So everybody leaves, and that's when Doc Ock starts saying some really weird stuff. He's like, Peter Parker, but I'm Peter Parker. And then Spider-Man responds with even more confusing dialogue. He's like, nope, not anymore. From now on, I'm Spider-Man. And readers are like, what's going on right now? Did I miss a page? What's happening? This is by far one of the worst days for Peter because now he's trapped in Doc's old decaying body, waiting as the hours go by to literally die, while Doc Ock spends a night or two in Peter's advanced, healthier body. Number 6, Spider-Man, Look Who's Home. Beginning with Amazing Spider-Man 365, Peter discovers that his parents, who have been dead for quite some time, are back. Nice. And he believes it for a hot minute. And by hot minute, I mean this goes on for like 20 issues. That's wild. Aunt May gets a private investigator because she feels like something is just not quite right about this. Peter, on the other hand, feels so comfortable that he decides to tell his parents, you know, who have been in a Russian camp for 20 years, sure, that he is in fact Spider-Man. This guy's spilling huge secrets already. Okay, this is odd. And then in issue 388, we learn that they're actually robots. Nice one, Chameleon. You fooled us again. He's so good with his robots. Number 5, Spider or man? So Peter has grown extra arms before, but I don't think anything was worse than his transformation in the spectacular Spider-Man disassembled storyline. Adriana Soria, aka the Spider Queen, saw Spider-Man as a potential mate, of course, so she forced a kiss upon Parker, and after some time passed, he began turning into a literal spider. So gross. Starting with growing an extra set of eyes, which is, it's kind of funny. Peter can feel himself change as well during this, which is pretty, dare I say, humorous at times, because this dude is now craving fly soup, and he's growing bristle hair in places you don't want to grow bristle hair. The best part is that MJ still makes this guy go to a wedding despite his transformations. He doesn't stick around too long, obviously, because he starts to panic and change even more, so now he's just swinging around the city, not even sure what he's doing. He can't think or breathe, but he knows that the Queen is calling him. His body starts to then change even more until eventually he's, a literal human spider. MJ's like, hey, you're fine, it's an open bar. What could go wrong? Let's go dance. Number 4, an eye for an eye. In Spider-Man The Other, Evolve or Die, Part 6 features a specific injury to Parker that lives in my head rent-free. Part 6, The Reckoning, kicks off with Morlun and Spider-Man going at it. They fight on the roof of the Bugle, and then eventually they crash inside the actual office. It's pretty exciting. Peter tries to take the fight elsewhere, as there's too many innocent people around, like say, I don't know, Peter's boss, for example. Peter is trying everything, and Morlun isn't even breaking a sweat. Morlun then yanks out Peter's left eye right out of the socket, and then to make us feel even more sick, he eats it like a cherry tomato. Yum. Number 3, Kraven's Last Hunt. Released back in 1987, Kraven's Last Hunt is one of the best Spider-Man stories to this day. The 6-parter begins with Kraven shooting Spider-Man with a tranquilizer and then burying him alive. Now, if that already didn't sound horrible enough, Kraven suited up as the webhead and became a better version of Spider-Man. Yeah, his version would save the day by brutally attacking criminals with the help of Vermin as a creepy sidekick. 2 weeks go by before Peter wakes up underground. He then chases down Kraven, but after Vermin almost takes Peter out, Kraven reveals that his hunting days are since done. While Peter chases down Vermin, Kraven literally retires. This guy goes home, he leaves a confession tape that he buried Spider-Man and took the suit, all that jazz, and then Kraven takes his own life. It's bizarre, but once you start this story, it's quite literally impossible to put down. Number 2, Gwen Stacy. This one we saw on screen in 2014, and honestly, I don't care how you felt about the Andrew Garfield movies, this scene slapped. It was wild. My throat was so tight, like the last time I cried in a movie theater was probably Bridge to Terabithia and then The Amazing Spider-Man 2. I'm being honest. I'm opening up to you guys. The Amazing Spider-Man issue 121 and 122 are titled Turning Point and The Goblin's Last Stand. These issues shocked readers. At this point in the comics, Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin, had forgotten who Spider-Man really was due to amnesia. Meanwhile, his son Harry was not in great shape as well. He was undergoing detoxification. He was having some substance abuse issues, so Norman was now stressing hard. Financial problems, family problems. He eventually had a mental breakdown, and all of a sudden he remembered his dark goblin side. And also he remembered who Spider-Man really was. His first target was Gwen Stacy. You gotta attack the heart, right? Peter meets them on top of the Brooklyn Bridge. He throws his hardest hits, but when Gwen is thrown over the side of the bridge, Peter can't catch her at the right angle, and in turn, her neck snaps because of the falling momentum. It's shocked readers and it shocked viewers. Like I said, a lot of tightness in the throat. Number 1, Peter's death. Moving on over to the Ultimate Comics, the death of Spider-Man is obviously one of the bigger ones on this list. So when Peter gets a call from MJ saying that Norman has escaped prison, he knows his family is at risk. And this was also happening while the New Ultimates and the Ultimate Avengers were going at it. So while Peter was trying to handle his own problems, he saw that the Punisher was taking aim at Captain America. So he jumped in the way, being a hero, and literally took a bullet for him. As if that wasn't already a rough night, Osborn and the crew are now gearing up to take the battle to Peter's front steps. Peter barely holds on during this fight. He's asking bystanders to call 911. He's not feeling great at all. And come issue 160, the Goblin lays one final blow, and that's the last we see of Ultimate Peter Parker.
Number 10, Marriage Blocked. No marriage. Recently in the comics, during the beginning of Sinister War in issue number 1, Peter was getting ready to propose to Mary Jane again after years of them not being together, not really being allowed to get together due to his deal with Mephisto. Finally, it seems as though Peter and Mary Jane are ready to once again move forward together as a couple. Peter has a ring ready and everything, and he plans to propose to Mary Jane following her big movie premiere. Unfortunately, fate and kindred have other plans for Peter. Instead of Spider-Man getting to propose later in the evening, their night is interrupted by a newly formed Sinister Six, and that's just one of the versions that it turns out Peter will have to face throughout the long night. Number 9. Proposal denied. Even when Spider-Man was able to propose to MJ, it didn't go as smoothly as he'd hoped the first time around. Granted, Peter didn't really have great reasoning or timing for proposing. He was pushed into the proposal idea sort of by his Aunt May, who at the time was in critical care. So I mean, how are you gonna say no? At this point, he and MJ were more friends than lovers, but Mary Jane, who is becoming more and more known for her kind and caring nature, was looking after Aunt May while she was in the hospital, despite the fact that Aunt May wasn't actually her own aunt, and she and Peter were more friends at that time. Mary Jane still obviously thought of Aunt May as family, and honestly, considering what her family life has been like throughout the comics, I can't say I'm surprised that she'd feel that way. Aunt May has been there for Mary Jane at times when MJ's own family wasn't or couldn't be. Peter ends up taking his aunt's advice, who suggests that he settle down with Mary Jane. He decides the best way to approach this topic is to surprise Mary Jane in the evening, knocking on her door and offering her some Cracker Jacks, which have a ring hidden in the box. Wow, so romantic, Peter. Mary Jane takes the ring but later returns it, adding to Peter's frustrations of that day and basically breaking his heart. Honestly, not the best idea for a proposal Peter's ever had, so I'm not really surprised it went that way, but I also love how Mary Jane's like, we should just be friends, like don't worry about it, I gotta be a free spirit. And Peter's like, she never wants to see me again. So dramatic, Peter, relax. And friends, if you are loving this list and you want more lists like it, be sure to let us know by hitting that like button. I guess that also means that you're super into Schadenfreude because you want to hear more about Peter's suffering. Number 8. Secret identity revealed. In the comics, Spider-Man's secret identity has been revealed before, and in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, we also now know that this is a thing. Spider-Man's true identity being Peter Parker gets revealed at the end of Spider-Man Far From Home in the MCU. And although we don't quite know yet how this will shake out for him in No Way Home, the trailer we got seems to imply that it's going to be a pretty rough go for Peter. So rough, in fact, that Tom Holland's Peter Parker will be forced to turn to Benedict Cumberbatch's Dr. Stephen Strange for help. Wong urges Strange not to meddle, warning him that the spell he's thinking of using is too dangerous. But of course, Doctor Strange being Doctor Strange, he decides to cast it anyway, attempting to help Peter out by making everyone forget his true identity again. Unfortunately, this too will likely lead to more problems than any kind of solution. And of course, there is the added factor that Spider-Man's identity isn't just out there, but that he's also been implied to have been involved and the cause of Mysterio's death, who is thought of by the public still as a hero. Oh dear. Number 7. Fighting Sinister Sixes. And 7. During the events of Sinister War, Spider-Man didn't just have his proposal interrupted, he had his life nearly snuffed out in the midst of being caught up in what could only be described aptly as a Sinister War. I mean, hence the name of that series. That is a war between multiple Sinister Sixes and even one all-female Sinister Seven known as the Syndicate. Not to be confused with the Sinister Syndicate, which is its own thing, just to be clear. So many sinister groups, so confusing. All the teams of villains for one reason or another seemed to be interested in Spider-Man, which meant he had quite an evening full of tons of fighting, near-death experiences, and stolen moments where he attempted to catch his breath only to be interrupted by one of the multiple teams who were in pursuit of him. I personally felt exhausted for Peter while just reading Sinister War. I was like, oh geez, he's just trying to catch his breath and he's like, I can't even catch my breath. My goodness. Number 6. Black Cat's secret powers. Something that definitely hurt Peter and affected their relationship severely was Felicia's secret that she had gotten powers of her own. Her powers unfortunately also happened to be the worst kind in terms of getting close to people, as they were bad luck powers. These powers seemed to affect not just anyone who targeted Felicia, but also at one point anyone who was extremely close to her as well, like say her lover, Spider-Man. The other unfortunate fact of these powers was that Black Cat had actually acquired them from Kingpin. While Spider-Man didn't end up finding out exactly what had gone on with Felicia and the powers, he did find out that he had a bad luck aura around him when he sought help from Doctor Strange to figure out what was basically going on, because he knew something was up. However, Peter assumed that Felicia had actually given him the bad luck aura on purpose, not knowing that it was all non-intentional and the Black Cat had only really gotten the powers to protect herself after almost dying at the hands of Doc Ock. Needless to say, Spider-Man's assumptions left him feeling betrayed, and he broke up with Black Cat. Number 5. Mysterio pretends to be a friend and a hero. In the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the whole reason that Peter's identity has seemingly been revealed is because of his interaction with Mysterio. At least, as I said, that's what it seems like thus far. Mysterio initially appeared to be a hero and a friend to Peter, claiming initially to have hailed from an alternate Earth that was lost because Mysterio was unable to succeed in protecting it. Mysterio claimed that the beasts, elementals that threatened his Earth, now threaten this one, and that he has come to basically try and stop them, hoping to succeed this time around on this Earth with the help of Spider-Man. Spider-Man is not sure at this point if he actually wants to be a hero or if he instead wants to give it all up and just be, well, a normal high school kid. He gives Mysterio the Edith glasses bequeathed to him by Iron Man following his death. And these glasses are not only super cool looking, at least I think they're super cool looking, but super important as they allow whoever has control over them, along with security clearance, to control a network of satellites as well as pretty much a massive drone army. It turns out that Mysterio really wants access to create a great illusion that will ensure his place as a world leader and a hero after being snubbed many years before by Stark himself. When Tom Holland's Spider-Man realizes that Jake Gyllenhaal's Mysterio is really a simple man named Quentin Beck, who is in actuality the villain of this story, you can imagine how awful he feels, and what hoops he is forced to jump through in order to save the day. Number 4. Ben returns as Jackal. Ben Reilly really had a rough go. This point is not only a revelation that it turns out was tough for Peter, but was also a reveal that made things hard for our alternate Spider-Man, once known as the Scarlet Spider, Ben Reilly. Following the end of the Clone Saga, it seemed as though we'd lost Ben forever. But let's keep in mind that Ben never really dies, but is pretty much the hero who always comes back. Although he doesn't always come back as a hero. We later learn that Peter's friend and clone Ben Reilly only died to be resurrected again and again by the Jackal, who was using him in experiments to basically create the perfect clone. This experience drove Ben insane, however, and so at one point he returns only to kill Miles Warren's Jackal and take the name for himself, becoming a villain and the new Jackal. Gasp. Number 3. Death of Tony Stark. In the Marvel Cinematic Universe, something that hit Peter really hard was the death of Tony Stark. Initially, it had been Spider-Man himself who had perished in the snap when Thanos kills half of the universe using the Infinity Gauntlet. Peter was part of the 50% who lost their lives and seemingly turned into dust. He would return when Hulk used the Infinity Stones to bring everyone back 5 years later, but Iron Man would be forced to use them one more time to eliminate past Thanos and his army, Thanos from the past. Being Tony was just a man, using the Infinity Stones to do something so great and so extreme not only exhausted his energy, but caused him to lose his life. Also, he had them like in his suit, so probably not as good as having them, you know, on a gauntlet that was made for that. This gave us a heartbreaking scene between Tom Holland's Spider-Man and Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man, where the two heroes once more were forced to say goodbye to one another near the end of Avengers Endgame, leaving Spider-Man without his mentor and feeling kinda lost as he continued to discover what it really means to be a hero, and if he actually wanted to become one at all. Number 2. Accidentally causing harm to Carly Cooper. It's hard being Spider-Man, not just in terms of all the heroics or all the people he has to save, all the responsibility he has as a hero, and even not just in terms of his own personal trauma and his struggles as Peter Parker. But one of the hardest things about being Spider-Man is really the balance between those two worlds. It's a dangerous life, and either Peter Parker is often forced to lie to people in order to protect them from it, or he tells them the truth, bringing them into the hero fold, but putting them potentially at a great risk. That is pretty much what happened here with Carly Cooper, Peter's one-time girlfriend, who all in all was a capable person and forensic specialist with the NYPD. Carly ended up being kidnapped by the Green Goblin, and after refusing to reveal what she knew about Spider-Man's true identity, was turned into a goblin herself with the Goblin Serum. She took up the name Monster for a while, and even after she was changed back into her normal self, was forced to leave New York in the end to create some distance between her and Peter, because she was like, I can't deal with this. She'd get over it, but I feel like that's pretty hard when you're Peter Parker and you already take everything very personally. If it's something bad happens, you're like, ugh, I really messed up. Oops. I'm the worst. That's Peter. Number 1. Peter's death. On our part 1 we talked about one of the times Peter died in the comics, though not in the main continuity, and here we're going to be doing the same. In fact, this death is very similar in terms of it being from an alternate reality where Miles Morales' Spider-Man also exists. We're talking about Peter's death in Into the Spider-Verse. This reality in the animated universe is still seemingly considered 1610, though it does differ from the comics. It's not comic 1610, it's animated universe 1610. Here, Miles' own Peter Parker, who is blonde, dies during a fight with Kingpin, and Miles actually witnesses it. His death is heartbreaking not just for Miles, who now finds himself the only surviving Spider-Man in his reality, without anyone initially to mentor him like Spider-Man said he was going to, but Peter's death here is also heartbreaking for his girlfriend, Mary Jane, who only after his death reveals his secret identity to the world, and for all of New York and possibly planet Earth, who knew him as their friendly neighborhood hero. Sad. It was very sad actually. I feel like I cried when Peter Parker died in Into the Spider-Verse. It's pretty tragic.
Kicking off the list at number 10, Spider-Man. We'll kick off this list on an itchy note. This version of Spider-Man from Earth 11580 is actually Spider's Man. You might be asking, wait a minute Taylor, spiders? Like more than one? Oh yeah, he's actually made up of thousands of spiders that work together as if they're one person, like a hive mind. See, before that incident, that horrible incident, Peter and Gwen were visiting Horizon Labs, and instead of one spider taking a bite out of Peter's finger and then blessing him with biceps and perfect vision, he instead fell into a pit of radioactive spiders where they all consumed him, and subsequently his consciousness was spread out through all of those spiders. Hive mind, so gross. How horrible is this already? If I just got robbed and Spider-Man came to save the day, I'd be sick. Just seeing a cover of this guy on Spider-Geddon issue 3 makes me so uncomfortable. I mean, hats off to Christos Gage and George Molina for making this character one of the most unique versions. You can definitely say that. Definitely unique. The Spider. Coming from Earth 15, the Spider, also known as Inmate 24739, made his first appearance in Exiles issue 12. Inmate, what's going on with that? Is Peter bad in this reality? Yeah, he's actually pretty horrible. He's a redhead who has a lot in common with Cletus Cassidy, and in turn he gets slapped with 67 consecutive life sentences by a jury. He's not as into the saving lives thing, he's rather into the opposite. He joined Weapon X after being drafted by the Timebreakers. Now, as horrible as the Spider sounds, he still feels like Peter when you read this comic. He has a similar sense of humor as Deadpool here, so it's still fun, although he's evil. Hyperion of Earth 4023 also joined, became the leader, and the Spider stood by his side as they planned on conquering multiple realities. Pete met his fate in issue 44 of Exiles when Firestar hit him with a Mega Blast. He turned into ash. Already cremated, look at that, we get to save money. And before we continue on with this list, if you want to go ahead and give us a thumbs up, that would be awesome. It really does help our nerd squad over here in our nerd base. You guys are the best. Thanks for sticking around. Let's keep going with this list. Number 8, Spider-Kid. Making his first appearance in Spider-Force issue 1, Earth 218 Peter's childhood is actually darker this time around, believe it or not. See, both of his parents passed away in a car crash, and Uncle Ben was a mean old man afterwards who was just horrible to Peter all the time. Peter actually changed his name to Charlie, and then he didn't try and be good. He actually became quite a troubled young man. He had to spend 2 years at the Administration for Child Services and then 2 more years at the Horizon Juvenile Detention Center. In order to get by, he chose to steal money from street dealers. He's not a bad kid, although I've just said that he is a few times. He just had a horrible childhood and he slipped down the wrong path. It happens. But that all changed when Charlie was recruited into the Superior Spider Army by Ashley Barton. She calls him Grandpa because he reminds her of an older Pete from her reality. He's like, yeah, I'm 13 though, please don't call me Gramps. Awesome. Coming to you live from Warp World, one of the most out there versions of Peter Parker hit the page in Infinity Wars issue 3. Moon Knight and Spider-Man are gearing up. They're making a game plan to take down Gamora. And Spider-Man says, look, just punch whoever I punch in a second. Deal? Easy peasy. That turns out to be a lot harder than imagined when the both of them merge together. Alongside ARACHKNIGHT, we got to meet some other amalgams of characters. We got Ghost Panther, Soldier Supreme, Iron Hammer, and more, so much more. Peter's mind was also separated into 4 different personalities, each desiring dominance. So we have Science Pete, the Knight Pete, Friendly Neighborhood Arachnid Pete, and for when it comes to signing checks and shaking hands, we have CEO Pete. Number 6, Astro Spider. Jumping on over to Earth 3145, making his first appearance in Spider-Force issue 2, John Jameson III was an astronaut for NASA, and during one mission, a spider got trapped in his suit, which it's an absolute nightmare scenario right there. but when the space shuttle was hit by cosmic waves, John then obtained these amazing new abilities. He didn't come home and stop bank robbers one quip and whip at a time. See, this Earth was now destroyed by a thermonuclear war, so Jameson was assigned to oversee the construction of a spacecraft on the Nautilus platform. He, along with 35 others, are the last of humanity. After this cosmic mishap, John can now read minds. He can create webs of solid telekinetic energy, but he met his fate a few issues later when he was feasted on by Verna. Sometimes being a spider totem sucks. Number 5. The Savage Spider-Man. Spider-Man, but a savage. So savage. This Peter Parker entered comics in Vault of Spiders issue 1. When a plane went down over Antarctica, Peter was the only survivor out of his family. He didn't have powers yet, he didn't swing his way to freedom, but he survived by using the last parachute. During his rough emergency landing, the wind moved him around quite a bit, and unfortunately he landed in one of the worst places on the planet, a spider's nest in Savage Land. I was just done with the spider stuff, now we're back to being itchy again. They all just bit him over and over and over again, and powers of course soon followed. The Savage Spider-Man was the new protector of Savage Land. Later on, he was recruited into the Spider Army by Ghost Spider to fight off the Inheritors back on our Earth 616. Honestly, this is a great version. I love when Wilson Fisk sees the boy growing up again. See, he was the reason the plane went down in the first place those many years ago. So when he returns to see if this Savage Spider-Man is real, he gets a little payback. Number 4. Hostess Cake Spider-Man. I think it's time we talk about one of the weirdest but yummiest versions of Spider-Man. Not only is Peter dishing out quips and flips, but he's also feeding the world too. What a hero. This version was born in an ad for Hostess Twinkies, so naturally its own Marvel universe has to exist. And also, it's fun to make it exist and to think about it. When it came down to taking on villains, Spider-Man wouldn't web them up, instead he would just huck treats at them, because that always works. Twinkies, Hostess cakes, anything, you name it. Funny enough, in Spider-Verse issue 1, the cakes are referred to as golden sponge cakes so that they don't get sued. It's also the same issue where we see the end of Golden Sponge Cake Spidey. It's sad, but if he stuck around for too long, realistically everybody would just get fat or riddled with cavities.
Spider sense tells me this cake isn't for eating. It's for throwing!
Number 3. Superior Spider. Starting in 2013, this version is the outcome of the Dying Wish storyline when Dr. Octavius planted his mind inside Peter Parker's. Nice little swap. There we go. We see this begin in Amazing Spider-Man issue 698. Peter gets a priority call from the Avengers, and when he meets them all on the raft, Cap informs him that one of his old enemies is dying, and Peter knows that it's Doc Ock before he even tells him. Cap says that he's asking for him. Well, rather, he's asking for Peter Parker. Peter goes in and he asks everybody for a private moment, just the two of them to talk it out, right? But when they're in there for that hot second, it's revealed that they somehow have switched bodies, page 20 and 22. So Peter in Doc's body is freaking out. He's worried what the hell to do, because now he's got his powers and his families and his friends are all at risk. You gotta stay away from those brain-swapping Octobots, that's the key. I'm not going to tell you what happens because it's really enjoyable. Go check it out yourself. Number 2. Spider-Boy. Marvel and DC are powerhouses, both on page and on screen. So when the two companies combine forces, we get some pretty amazing characters like Spider-Boy. Making his first debut in Marvel vs. DC issue 3, residing on Earth 9602, Spider-Boy is an amalgam of Spider-Man and Superboy. How epic is that? Spider-Boy is a clone. Now he's a clone of Peter who was created during an accidental lab explosion. General Ross felt responsible for this explosion, so he ended up adopting the young lab lad. They were a fun duo until Ross was taken out by a mugger, so Pete then became a hero. He put together the suit, became famous almost overnight. That whole event kicked off the with great power comes great responsibility vibe. Now back when he returned to Project Cadmus, Pete was given a web pistol to help him swing around town. In this story, he doesn't have webs here, but it doesn't really matter. Because of his new superpowers, he can focus gravity inwards to make himself stronger and move faster, or he can lower gravity around himself in order to jump higher, further, and faster. He just clicks the off switch on gravity and then climbs walls. Must be nice. Guy probably kills it with wall sits. And finally, number 1, Flash, Betty, and John. For the last one on this list, we figured we'd end on a 3-in-1. What If is releasing weekly episodes on Disney Plus currently, so I have to throw it back to one of my favorite issues from Volume 1 back in the 70s. What if someone else besides Spider-Man had been bitten by the radioactive spider? Written by Don Glutt, What If Volume 1 Issue 7, we get to see Flash Thompson, Betty Brant, and John Jameson get their shot at being Spider-Man. How lucky. First, Flash gets bit, he gets the powers, and he teaches a bad driver a lesson. With his new strength, I mean, he's a little bit too harsh. The middle finger always works, but okay, rocky start, that's fine. Then he decides to take a crack at professional wrestling. He thinks it's going to be a breeze, but due to said super strength, he killed the guy instead of tapping him out. Not much of a superhero there. The Vulture ends up ending his not so hot streak, so next up we have Betty Brant. Her costume is arguably the flashiest. It makes for great photo shoots, apparently. Gotta get those likes somehow, make those superpowered TikToks. I'm here for it. But when she runs out of web fluid while striking a pose, the thief that takes Uncle Ben's life runs on by, and no one does anything about it. And finally, this issue shows us John Jameson getting his shot. While his outfit was also pretty on point, his judgment was not. John tried to stop a space shuttle from crashing and didn't live to tell the tale. Next time you feel like web swinging to work, just remember that the responsibility thing is just as important as the powers. Number 10. What if Spider-Man joined the Fantastic Four? Okay, I have to start with this one as it's the very first issue of What If, released back in the late 70s. Now the Watcher breaks it down how these things work, how these what ifs work, as he will in the Disney Plus original this summer with the smooth voice of Jeffrey Wright to accompany the beautiful animation. Now he explains to readers in all of these issues that there are multiple realities. And the first one we get to explore is where Peter joins the first family to make some dough. And yes, of course, they call themselves the Fantastic Five. Because 4 plus 1 is 5. See, we're alright here, we're pretty good. The Bugle doesn't hate on Peter. He's actually loved and respected in this story. And it's a good start for the web slinger on this long what if journey, but it's about to get so much more dark. Number 9. What if Spider-Man had rescued Gwen Stacy? Now issue 24 starts getting into the darker, but also kind of positive notes. See, instead of Spider-Man not catching Gwen with his webs, he ended up jumping off the bridge himself to rescue her. And then after that, well, love is in the air. She's alive. Things are obviously much more positive. He proposes, he reveals his identity to her. Things are looking quite nice. They're so good. And on top of that, Harry and Norman reunite. Harry found out about his father's secret identity and put his life on the line in order to save his father. So they worked it out as well. So far it's like yes and yes. So far so good. Now when Peter and Gwen get married at the ceremony, they're doing the cha-cha slide, drinking some champagne, having a great time, and then J. Jonah Jameson just waltzes in with a bunch of police officers with footage that reveals Peter Parker as Spider-Man. Also, what a dick. Like, that really, that day? Do it tomorrow. Do it the day before. I don't know. The wedding? Not nice. Now this was the same tape that brought Norman and his father together, and it's the same tape that made Peter have to run for the rest of his life to protect the ones that he loves. It starts good, ends bad. Classic Peter. Number 8. What if Uncle Ben had lived? Okay, still in volume 1, now in issue 46, we see another positive scenario unfold, or rather it starts that way. Yeah, so Uncle Ben didn't suffer from back pain in the storyline, or sciatica or anything like that. He just slept comfortably that fateful night, which is great, but some things still have to happen. So instead of him going downstairs to check on that noise, it was Aunt May. So Aunt May ended up biting the bullet instead, and this changed the dynamic for Peter and Uncle Ben. I mean, obviously. See, Uncle Ben and Peter were quiet. Peter was for sure closer to May before she died, and when Ben figured out that Peter was Spider-Man, he actually encouraged him to continue and be there for the helpless, rather than, just doing it out of some tortured sense of misplaced responsibility. So Spider-Man becomes better and more confident, which is a great sign. And before we continue on with this list, if you want to go ahead and give this video a thumbs up, because it does wonders for our channel over here at Top 10 Nerd. Thank you so much for your constant support. Let's get right back into this list. I don't want to waste any more of your precious time, although I'm still doing so. Let's go back in. Number 7. What if Spider-Man had kept his 6 arms? Okay, what if volume 2 issue 42? We're getting into the weirder what ifs now. And it shows us what the world would look like when Spider-Man from Earth 92-100 keeps his extra 4 arms. Now the trick to this problem originally was in Michael Morbius's blood, but in this what if, it shows us that Morbius never actually made it to Dr. Connor's lab. Instead, Peter just stuck with these arms. He had no choice. Now eventually he tries to figure out something. He goes to the Xavier mansion for help. They all attack him because, they don't recognize him. He has 6 arms and he's aggressive and upset. So Peter leaves them too. He's like, damn. So now he's bummed about this mutation even more, but he's easily able to stop Dr. Octopus. So that's, that's a nice positive out of all this. Now things finally get easier for Peter when Mr. Fantastic surprises Spider-Man with Electro Vibra arms that will make his extra arms invisible, so he can at least blend in. That's progress, that's fair. Number 6. What if Spider-Man had kept his cosmic powers? Okay, in my last video I talked about these alternate powerful versions of Spider-Man, and amongst them was this Captain Universe version. So Spider-Man doesn't have these powers for too long, but in What If Volume 2 issue 31 we see a world where he remained the most powerful being. Now he starts off retiring. I mean, first of all, he wants a normal life. So Venom, of course, knows that he cannot beat this cosmic Spider-Man no matter what, so he agrees. He agrees to take over for the webhead after his retirement. So far, this is pretty wild. Peter enjoys retirement for a little bit, but in the end, he still feels like he has to help humanity. Now, at one point, he tries to demand Thor to make it rain to fix famine in all these drought-ridden lands, but Thor refuses as his oath doesn't allow him to do such things. They end up having a cosmic battle in space. Spider-Man literally punches him off the planet to start it off, and it's wild. They're both so powerful. Now finally Dr. Doom shows up. Well, we think it's Dr. Doom, but it's actually a Doombot. So the Doombot shows up offering to help get rid of Pete's problem, and it works. It works so well, in fact, that the spider powers leave too, and Peter is finally able to retire and have a daughter with MJ. Now at the very end, they look into her eyes, and they're all white. So MJ jokes and says, "Oh, she's got her father's eyes. How lovely. Now she's a god that you have to deal with. Enjoy." Number 5. What if the alien costume had possessed Spider-Man? What if Volume 2 Issue 4? We see a darker turn of events with Peter in that new black alien suit. Now we see a world where the sonic blast didn't break the two of them apart. They just stayed together and then trouble happens. The symbiote claims that Spider-Man and him are now one, and Reed Richards couldn't detect the symbiote for days because spider sense and the symbiote's camouflage powers, he was like, eh, good luck, zoom, disappeared. Now the symbiote ends up ripping through the Avengers, and due to the fact that Peter was stuck with the symbiote problem, he couldn't save S.H.I.E.L.D. agents like he normally would. They ended up biting the bullet because of this, and then Peter ended up losing 50 years of his life trying to deal with this. He ended up dying of old age just on the ground. It's dark, but it's a really good what if. Number 4. What if Spider-Man had a Spider-Girl? What if Volume 2 Issue 105, Mayday Parker has another chance of life rather than, you know, be written out. Now this takes place years after her father Peter retired. Now Mayday Parker began getting powers of her own when she was around 15 years old, and when Normie Osborn stepped up as the new Green Goblin, she stepped up as the new webhead. She found an old outfit that belonged to Ben Reilly and became Spider-Girl. Now the issue did so well that Marvel launched its own universe to continue these stories. Now it's called the MC2 universe. Number 3. What if Kraven the Hunter had killed Spider-Man? Ooh, it's dark. Written by Richard Howell, Volume 2, Issue 17. Now this one is dark, obviously by the title you know what's gonna happen, but it's really compelling. What if Kraven had killed Spider-Man? Okay, so we start with Pete in the streets, he's patrolling the city when he's suddenly trapped by Kraven, and just like that, he unloads a beating. He kills Peter, and then to celebrate, he eats a bunch of spiders, and then suits up in his clothes. Like, what a weirdo. What a monster. So now he's Spider-Man. He's the captain now. Okay, cool. Now what's step 2, you freak? At the same time, MJ is approached by a couple of thugs on the street, and then in comes Spider-Man to save her. Now MJ can tell something's up because Spider-Man doesn't even recognize her, first of all, and the way that he's fighting these guys is just brutal. Like, it's not for the faint of heart. So Captain America, Daredevil, and Human Torch jump in to see what is going on with the wall crawler. Now they did a decent job wearing down the beast, but still they needed more power. So he ate a bunch of spiders earlier, so now it's only fair if he tries to eat Spider-Man's dead body, right? I guess. So MJ tells Cap and the gang that Spider-Man is actually Peter Parker. This Spider-Man is indeed not the same. So that's one scenario that happens. Spider-Man's identity's out, which sucks. And then Aunt May goes into denial hearing that news, and now she's messed up for life. And the media isn't happy with the tension between supers and the public either at this point. So the story ends up with MJ standing at Peter's funeral, wondering how things could have been. God, Peter can't catch a break in any of these universes. Number 2. What if Spider-Man had never become a crime fighter? One of my favorite what ifs. This is so amazing. Okay. What if issue 19, written by Peter Gillis? We see a life for Peter if he decided to take out his uncle's killer in that moment instead of, you know, letting him get away and then the rest of his life happening the way it did. So what if Spidey was Spider-Man but just for the fame? What if he just wanted to be a famous dude? Go get the TV news people, he says. Also, TV news people, that's a funny way to put it. Now he's the big dog in town. He just wants to brag about how he takes down these criminals. He even refers to Flash as a nobody, which, I mean, you know, words hurt, Peter. Like, that's, you don't call somebody a nobody. Pretty rude. And then he goes on the Johnny Carson show to be the cool cat in town, where it's revealed on the show that John Jameson, American astronaut, had died upon re-entry into Earth's atmosphere. And then JJ is heartbroken that the real heroes have to die instead of these costume clowns just kicking their feet back, talking shit on talk shows, you know? So Peter realizes what matters most by the end of the story, thankfully, but having Flash call nobody, it's honestly worth the read for all the bad stuff that happens. Number 1, what if someone else besides Spider-Man had been bitten by the radioactive spider? Okay, this one is jam-packed. We have 3 different scenarios to enjoy, and this is one that I definitely left this one for number 1 for a reason. It's so good. I mean, first of all, like I said earlier, who wouldn't want to be Spider-Man? You probably imagined it to yourself when I said it. What would you do if you were Spider-Man? Would you go for the fame? Would you kind of lay low? Would you take out criminals in like a cool way? Would you tell your family? Would you make a Twitter? Would you I am Iron Man it and just tell everybody? Well, in What If Volume 1, Issue 7, back in the late 70s, we see Flash Thompson, Betty Brant, and John Jameson all get their shot at being the web slinger, and it's way harder than I thought it was gonna be. So Flash gets bit and he teaches a bad driver a lesson, and you know, he's maybe a little bit too harsh, not gonna lie. And then he decides, oh, you know what, I'm pretty good at fighting people, I'm gonna take a crack at professional wrestling. But due to his super strength, he accidentally kills a guy doing this. The Vulture has an easy time taking him on as well, so it's not really the best in any scenario. And then Betty Brant is now up next. Now her costume is pretty sweet. It makes for great photo shoots, apparently. But while she was making TikToks, she ran out of web fluid, and when a thief ran by and got away, she had no web stuff. She couldn't do anything. She was like, I used my powers. I'm out for the day. See ya. And that thief was the one who took Uncle Ben's life. And then next up is JJ's son, John Jameson. While his outfit was pretty on point, his judgment was not. He wasn't good at the superhero life, and he died trying to stop a space shuttle from crashing. So we like ending on fun notes here at Top 10 Nerd.